Hey everybody, this is Monica Morrissey with Soul Whisperings vlog, and we have a guest today, and I am so excited to talk to him. Dorian Johnson is a motivational speaker, digital marketing and content creator, award-winning author and influencer. He is the co-author of the award-winning memoir titled The View from Above, One Father's Memoir of Grief Guided to Grace, which is the story of the search for his oldest son, Bailand, who passed away in a hiking accident back in 2017, along with the memorial hike I took with a friend a year to the day of Bailand's passing. He recently published his second book titled A Day in the Life of Grief, The 10 Most Common Misconceptions of Grief. He is currently working on a new book titled The Truth About Loss, which is about the secondary losses we feel from our experiences. Along with sharing his story of grief and loss, he is sharing a simple message of hope and healing. This message is about learning what the different virtues we all have inside ourselves, and then knowing that these virtues are what make us who we truly are. He is a board member of the Global Grief Network over marketing for the organization and has had the opportunity of sitting on several podcast panels discussing different aspects of grief. He is about to launch his own podcast called A Day in the Life of Grief, along with putting together a podcast called The Chrysalis Effect, and will be looking for people to share their stories of how they became who they are because of their experiences. Welcome, Dorian. And I just have to say that I'm sorry that the reason that we're here is because you no longer have your son, but I also am honored to have you on this vlog.
Thank you. And I know we've tried to get together a few times in that, and I think it's sometimes it's a matter of timing, but I'm absolutely honored to be able to visit not only about my son, but also the things that I've received to share with other people as well. So
Yeah, so what I always say when I'm talking about grief is that grief is really about love. And I read your book, and I can tell that you loved your son unconditionally. You loved him for who he was, and that really showed in that book, that love, because that's what grief is, right? It's just the love.
oh yeah. And it the interesting part is we always talk about the triggers because of grief, because of things that we feel like we've lost, or things that we won't have the opportunity to share, right? I mean, a lot of his friends have gotten married. I don't get a chance to participate in that. Even he was a cross country runner. And so every time I know that there's a cross country meet, I mean, I'm not a runner by any means, but remembering about going to those meets and that, and just the things to share. But on the flip side, I watched one of his favorite movies, Multiplicity, the other day, and it was almost as if he's just sitting there watching it with me, and we're laughing at the same parts that we always used to laugh at. And I'm just like, oh, I love this. And it was just a beautiful moment because I know that my son understands that as being human, we have to go through certain things. We have to work through certain things, but it's not like he wants me to be sad, or he wants me to be troubled by certain things. And so I love when it's almost as if he reaches out and say, okay, it's time, let's have another one of our moments and sit, and we can laugh like we used to and just enjoy our time together. So grief is an interesting thing because there's so many things that we grieve about, so many things that we consider, oh, I don't even know how to move forward. And I think one of the most beautiful parts of grief is the connections that we can make with other people, the connections that we can look at somebody and say, you know what, I understand, I don't understand what you went through, and I'm so sorry. But the beautiful part is I can sit with you
Mhm.
and offer whatever you need: compassion, understanding, kindness, acceptance, all of that, without even saying a word. And it doesn't come from me, it comes through me. That's the amazing part, is if I open up and allow myself to do that, offer that, you know, patience is one thing, because sometimes we don't have the capacity or allow ourselves to have the capacity to be patient. And yet, if we see somebody who is hurting, grieving, we can sit there and allow that to come right through us. And they aren't the only ones who receive something. We get something from it as well. You
Mm.
know, it's beautiful. And you would never think that, going through something as traumatic and horrific as losing a child, that a person could ever learn that. But that is beautiful. It's an absolutely beautiful thing to learn and look at life way differently.
So share us a little bit about how you, your son, I believe, passed away in
Mhm.
2017, and
Yes,
he
ma'am.
passed away on a hiking trip.
Hmm.
He was
Hmm.
hiking. And so walk me kind of through, like, that from that point to where you are now. Like, how did you, move through that? Because so many people, and I don't want to say stuck, because I don't think that that's the right word, but they do, you know, feel a lot of emotion, right? It's that love that has
Yeah.
nowhere to go.
Hmm. Yeah.
But also, like, how do you get to that point where you can say what you just said? And I also love to hear the stories about these people and continue their legacy. Like, I love to hear, like, oh, he had, this favorite movie,
Yes.
rather
Yeah.
than just the
Yeah.
point of death. We're always
Yeah.
focused on that story about their death, but what about
Hmm.
who they were, and carrying on that legacy and
Yeah.
allowing you to just share about your son? Like,
Yeah.
how did you move from there to here now?
I think I'm going to start off by saying we have to get past the point, excuse me, of the stigma that we feel guilty while grieving and trying to find our own happiness. That guilt is what stops us a lot of times, right? Because how can we be happy? Why should we be happy? What Something has been taken away that we can never get back, and that, yeah, absolutely. But excuse me, some of the most amazing, beautiful stories are the ones that I've heard since his passing, from friends, from parents of kids who he graduated with, who would say, you know what, he was the only one who, you know, included my son or my daughter. He's the one. The rules that he had it. Um, I had him through high school. He stayed with me. My other kids were down with their mom, but the only rules I gave him, because he governed himself so well, meaning he would always, check and say, okay, this is what the. I never had. I kept giving him rope, leeway and all of that, but I never had to make any rules for him, because he didn't. I mean, he didn't venture out and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to test this boundary or test this boundary." Um, but his rules were, keep your grades up, which I'm a big hypocrite if I held him to that one, right? But the other part is he would have a curfew, and if he got home late, he would come up, and he was more worried about being past curfew than I was, because his response was usually, "I'm sorry, I was taking somebody home. I'm sorry, I would just finish a conversation because no one's listening to this person and they're struggling." But I'm just like, I have no issue. I have no
Mhm.
issue with you being late. Are you doing okay? And he's like, yeah, it's just. And so I heard a lot of that, of the people talking about that kind of response that he gave after. even, they're in the book, it talks about, I love this story because um, he, I think he was a sophomore, and he had a friend who was on juvenile probation. Okay? Now, the interesting part is we hear that and we're like, oh boy. But the interesting part is that my son, Bailand, went over to his friend's house, and his friend is on curfew. So he has to stay in after 7, can't go anywhere. My son makes it sound like a troublemaker, goes over there to hang out and that, and it's after 7, and he's like, let's go do something. He's like, I can't, I'm on curfew, I'm gonna get in trouble. I said, come on, let's go. When I'm hearing the story, I'm like, wait, what? And that his friend's dad is telling me this. So the probation officer gets wind of it, goes over and says, okay, help me to understand, why in the world would you be out after curfew and that? And Gerald, the dad says, well, I'll take responsibility because, we know that about curfew, but when Bailand Johnson came over and was, they left and stuff, and the probation officer just stops him and says, you visit with Bailand, I don't care what they're doing. They're not getting in trouble. I talked to the other probation officer who I've known ever since he was little. I mean, great guy. He knew Bailand very well. And I shared that story with him, and he looked at me dead in the eye and he says, you have no idea the reputation your son had. And how I'm honored to be called Bailand's dad, you know? And there were so many times when, you know, it wasn't necessarily a full-on party, not the way that we look at it or think it is, but if parents knew that Bailand was going to be somewhere, and their son or daughter said, hey, we're going to go do this, and no, you're not. We're going to go, no, you're not. Bailand's going to be there. Have fun. Because they always knew how. So I have, was he perfect? Absolutely not. But what a beautiful example. What a beautiful person to say, let me share with you the view that I have of what we can be, at growing up. And you're not perfect, you're not, grades aren't always up, blah, blah, blah. But let me tell you, the hardest part for me, and I had a friend share this with me when I was explaining, how great and wonderful Bailand is at this and that. And he looked at me, he's like, he's just like you. Oh, no, he's not. Okay. Because I still have this pile of rocks that I can pick any single one of them out and say, this is why. This is why. This is solidified in me, why I'm not even close to that. Right. But he pointed out how we met, which was we picked him up on the side of the road as he's walking because his car broke down. And he has to, I didn't want to have this conversation because I didn't want to acknowledge the fact that I taught Bailand, or Bailand is the way he is because we were with each other so much, and we would do certain things to help people out because it's easier to acknowledge that in somebody else than it is to acknowledge it in you. But if you see it in another person, it's because you recognize it in you. You can acknowledge them. You just can't acknowledge it in you. That's the hard part, right? So he had hundreds of miles of boots. He had hundreds of miles on his boots from hiking and different things. And so when he went hiking, the last one, he leaves Thursday just after noon, doesn't come home. I get one last text that says, this is a beast of a hike, but talk about a view. The tough part is knowing that looking back, if I could change anything, I'm not sure I would. I know I wouldn't, because of the fact that he was in such a good place. And for him to be taken at that moment, there's no question about whether he was in a good place, if he was happy, if he was, whatever. So I have to look at that and say, you know what? Yeah, for me, that's a tough place to be, to look at it and say, he's in such a good place. I want to enjoy life with him. Right. So after he passes and we have the funeral, since he was with me, I spoke at his funeral, and I don't know how I did, because that was a tough thing. But you're still in that realm of nothing's real. I'm still talking to him like he's away at college, or talking about him like he's away at college, or what a great kid, and I can't wait to see him at Christmas and all of that. But I talked about how he is, and the reason that we love him is because he loved us first and was kind to us first, respectful, and accepting and tolerant, all of these things, right? Now, here's the beautiful part. It's because when you go through something like that and it's so traumatic, the only way that I can describe it is you get stripped all the way down to your bones, and you don't know even what to do, or where that next breath is going to be, or where you're going to get the strength to take another step. And so I started looking at these things that I shared in his funeral, and I realized that they're all virtues. Okay. And I started researching this out like crazy, and I went from the Bible, I went to different philosophers who talked about virtue, and what it is, and what it does. And in one of the places I went, there was um, a Bible encyclopedia that went through different, broke down different aspects of the Bible, and it talked about virtue. Okay. Mm-hmm. So as I'm looking at that, it's saying that in the English language, virtue, the definition is excellence of mind and excellence of character. That's pretty broad. We know that. And yet that still is a blanket statement. What does that even mean? So in this encyclopedia, it says that if you go back further to the Greek definition of the word, it means a manifestation of power. Okay. So if I look at it that way and I say, well, what does that mean? Well, if I'm kind, if I open a door for you and you say, thank you, but no, and you take your own door, nothing is taken away from me for offering kindness to you. Right? It's still there. You just made a conscious choice not to receive that. Okay. It still allows me to be authentically me and be kind. Right? So I look at this and I said, okay, what exactly does that mean? And I went and spoke to a counselor who, she had lost her daughter at 19. And I didn't want to go into a lot with her because of her grieving and that. And yet I asked her, I said, if virtue is in a conversation, is in the same room with you, when you talk to people about, whatever you need to talk to them about, I said, how does that change? How does that affect your conversation? And she said, it changes the whole dynamic. And I said, okay, keep going, explain. And she said, what it does is courage and love and integrity and honesty and happiness and all of these things cannot be in the same room. Well, I'll say it this way: fear and doubt and shame and guilt cannot be in the same room with courage and happiness and joy and integrity and honesty, gratitude, all of that. It cannot be there. And so the conversations that you can have would be much more authentic, because it doesn't matter what you say, because that's the truth of what that is. And there's no fear that someone look at you and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're this or this." So all of a sudden, my mind blows up. Okay, meaning I see this huge picture of what um, virtue can really do for a person, right? And in the Bible, it talks about the woman with the issue of blood, and she wants to touch the hem of Christ's cloak. She knows that she will be healed. And there's no question in my mind that when he says, "Who touched me?" he's not looking around. He knows exactly who touched him, because of that connection, because the energy, because the feel of it. And he's looking at her. And, she says, "I did," and he's like, he looks at her. "Yep, I know you did." Okay. My point on that one is that where it all got started for me is, I'm like, what virtue is going to stop an issue of blood, a physical ailment? And what came to me, I love the word ponder, because what it means is you ask a question, you don't start overthinking, you get out of your way, you allow whatever to come to you, the random thoughts, right? So, and the beautiful part is that 2 or 3 days go by and I'm still pondering about this, and I'm like, okay, fine, what is it? What does it mean? And I get this answer: well, it doesn't really matter now, does it? It's for her. I'm like, point well taken. So the reason I bring this up is because my friend, the therapist, or the counselor, she said, put it in a visual so I understand. And so I emailed this to you, and I took 10 different virtues and I did so much research. I call it the chemistry of virtue, because what this is based on the 10 different virtues at the bottom. Inside of each one of those, there are different elements of wisdom, different elements of justice and fortitude, self-control and love and positive attitude, hard work, integrity, gratitude, and humility. Okay. To look at this and say, well, what does that even mean? Okay. Well, if we look at wisdom and we say, well, the only thing I know about wisdom is I have to go find some guy who has a long beard and he lives in a cave, right? And people laugh, and I'm like, that's the point. But what about creativity and balance and wonder, but also intuition and logic and reason? We look at logic and reason and say that's what makes wisdom what it is. So that's the intellectual virtue that we a lot of people focus on. This is the way it is based on facts. That's one language. Okay, if someone speaks that language, the other type of virtue is moral virtue. So intellectual virtue is the thoughts of your mind. Moral virtue is the thoughts of your heart. So if you and I are having a conversation and you share facts, you say this is what it is, I can look at you and say, you know what, our conversation, you're absolutely right, but you hurt my feelings. If you're based around intellectual virtue and I'm moral virtue, you're going to look at me and say, it's facts, it's numbers. What's the problem? Am I wrong? No, you're not. But if there's not moral virtue attached to it, love and kindness in the approach, we're never going to get anywhere. I can't explain to you, based on logic and reason, how it hurts my feelings. It just does. There's something absent there, something lacking. And so if I can say, you know what, kindness to me is so different than being nice. Kindness means that we look at somebody and say, because I love you, here's here's why I'm saying it. I want you to be better. I'm just letting you know I'm not going anywhere, but this is the way it is. And then look at him with that little smile and just say, because I see you. I see you, right? Now, here's here's why I love that that table, because I didn't know what else to do. So I went, took the periodic table of elements and wiped it clean, put it all together that way. And I was talking to a guy who he taught physical science in high school. And as I'm talking to him about it, he I showed it to him, and he would taught chemistry. And he's like, do you have any idea how the real table works, the real table of elements? I said, no. He's like, do you know what the atomic number is for? I said, I know they have numbers. He's like, do you know what a proton neutron is? Yeah. I said, or he's like, do you know what they do? Uh-uh. Do you know what electron is? Uh-huh. Do you know what it does? Uh-uh. So he's like, do you know what a noble gas is? Uh-uh. I've heard of it. And he starts laughing because he's like, this is absolutely absurd that you put this together, not knowing how it works. And he started explaining how an atom is made up, created. The nucleus is the identity. This is one of the most beautiful things that I've received, I think, because you look at this and say, this is the identity of the atom. The only way it changes is it has to give or it loses or gains more protons and neutrons, but it cannot stay itself if that's what it does. The identity is secure. Okay. And so I said, okay, so I'm going to say it this way: it will never identify as anything else but what it is. The reason I say it that way is because I wear boots and Wranglers. I'm not a cowboy. I don't have horses. I don't have cows. I'm not a rodeo. Any of that stuff. They're comfortable. I like them. I grew up. I like um, small country towns. My identity is not based around boots and Wranglers, but that's part of me. So I will never identify as a rodeo clown because I do that, or a cowboy, or whatever. I can remain who I am, no matter what I'm wearing, right? But then in this atom, in this noble gas, a noble gas means that it has enough electrons in, they call them orbitals. I call them circles. That's easier for me to remember. But in each, there's an orbital around the nucleus that the most that you can have as far as electrons is 2. And then in the next one, how many ever out, you can have 8 electrons in there. If they have less than 8, that's where they're looking around to make a connection with. So you look at hydrogen, it has 1. It's willing to give that away or connect to another one, no matter the consequence. Okay, so it can make something explode, it can make something productive. Then you have on the other side the ones that have 5, 6, 7, and they're willing to take any electrons. So I looked at my friend and I said, are you talking about like a doormat, and like somebody who has, different tendencies to control and manipulate? And he's a exact.
Oh, no, you just muted. Somehow you muted. You gotta unmute yourself, Dorian. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Okay, we're back.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure what a call was coming in and out, but we still okay?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
continue
All right.
on.
Good. Okay. All right. So to make this very simple, if we look at this and we say our identity is here, the first circle, instead of electrons, we say, let's take some of these elements of these virtues, okay? And we'll take out of integrity, vulnerability, and authenticity. And we're going to scare the hell out of somebody. By doing that, what we do is we say vulnerable means like we're going to be open, our heart's open, our mind's open. We can receive whatever we need. Authenticity is that we are who we are, no matter what. In any given situation, we can be who we are. And everybody's like, how in the world do we protect that? How do we feel safe around somebody if we're vulnerable and authentic? Because somebody's going to hate us and they're going to beat us up and kill us mentally and emotionally. I'm like, I'm glad you're with me. So in the next circle, we can have 8 electrons to make it a noble gas. Well, what if we add 8 different elements, virtue elements? Okay. So we say, well, what do we need? We need courage, and we need balance. We need joy. We need character. We need gratitude. We need, so we could be, appreciation or gratefulness for different things. And so in doing that, we can take a certain amount of intellectual virtues and a certain amount of moral virtues, and we can become our own noble gas. And no one can do or say anything to change who we truly are. That's who we authentically truly are, right? It sounds crazy, it sounds difficult, but here's how it works. If we look at this and say, I don't know how to engage in some of these things that you're talking about, as far as like the different elements. What do I do? Where do they come from? Well, every single one of those is already inside of us. We have the capacity, whatever our own capacity is for that. Okay. And again, I'll talk about patience. I love bringing this up because people are like, oh, I'm not patient. I'm like, good. Because we're going to go over to the store. I don't care what store. We're going to get behind the oldest, slowest person, and we're going to be patient on purpose. Okay. And people start laughing about that because they're like, are you crazy? No, because watch this. If we get behind them and we are following, we're not trying to find a way around them and stuff, they're going to look back at us and say, I'm so sorry. I'm old. I'm slow. And this. We're already patient, but what other elements wake up? Kindness, compassion, acceptance, tolerance of them being old and slow. We're not saying anything that derogatory about them being old and slow. That's a fact, right? But if we allow ourselves to do that, and then what can we, can we help you? What can I help you find? I mean, do you need help getting something off the top shelf? What do you need? And all of a sudden, guess what? We ourselves are offering that manifestation of power and creating a space that's so safe, not just for us, but for that other person and anyone else who is watching. Okay. So the best part is that if we are struggling with anxiety or depression or anger or whatever, all of a sudden we get a good shot of oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. So do they. So does everybody else watching. And what do they want to do? It's not pay it forward. It's the fact that they want to do this and allow themselves to receive that. And so we keep going and finding different ways to do that, right? And so I just share the concept of you just have to wake them up. You have to be aware of what you need. And you may not understand that this element connects to this one or this one or this one, but they could all be there at the same time. Guess what? If you get 5 shots of oxytocin, you can't be grumpy. You
Mm.
can, but you're grumpy on purpose, and there's more to the story. So we go back to how can a person find happiness after something like that? I will be completely honest and say that when after that happened, the loss of reality is real. This can't be happening. This I don't. What now, right? And if in those moments where you're stripped down to your bones, if we create a virtue formula like this and say, what do I need? There were days, I mean, I don't know how many days, just getting out of bed, I think to myself, what do I need? Courage. There it is. I need, strength. There it is. And all of a sudden, without even thinking about it, you're already up and you're moving around. And when you see someone and they say, are you doing okay? You can authentically and vulnerably say, hell no, I'm not doing okay right now. In this moment, I'm not. Right? But then you again say, okay, but I don't want to dwell in this. I can say, what do I need? And I can receive from them also certain things. It's not all on me to create my own noble gas, because if you think about it, in some of these, if it's kindness or courage, their courage and my courage may look different, but they can connect because they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the big picture of this is that the healing during grief, it has to have something that is equal or greater to itself to 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 start cleansing that wound from the experience. Okay. And if we feel like we've lost something, there are certain things where if we lose a loved one, if we lose an opportunity, if we get divorced, things like that, I feel like I've lost something. Well, what is it that you've lost? And then we look at it and say, okay, inside that loss, perfectly understandable. It looks like you've lost or feel like something's been taken away. Let's add a little bit of this type of virtue. What elements of it do you need? Do you want? You wake it up, you go out and look at for somebody else who has that, and you can start the process, because again, it's not, you're acknowledging it in you, and it reflects back to you, and you can say, oh, there it is. I think the healing comes from knowing that you cannot do this in your finite mind. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot. And it to receive this, that's the beautiful part. I don't know how in the world I am so blessed to receive this, to share something that is completely outside of me, and yet is something that respect is respect, and kindness is kindness, no matter where you go. So it's almost a universal way to learn about yourself, to heal, but also to define yourself. I'll say this last part about this, and then we'll visit a little bit more about things. But the last way that I love this, and because if as we talk, we did the the very thing of saying, you say, hi, I'm Monica. I say, hi, I'm Dorian. That's a defining moment. Okay. Because I don't know, you don't know if I'm an athlete. You don't know if I am, a husband, a father, a student, an employee, whatever, something that's completely outside of me and can change. Right.
Mm.
But if I say, this is how I define myself. D is for dignity, and O is for originality, and R is for respect. I is for individuality, A is for authenticity, and N is for nobility. If I know that going outside of if I hit the door and go to the outside world, I know that's who I am and how what I need to live up to, so to speak. Because if you and I have a disagreement, what a great thing to sit back on and say, am I offering that to me and to you? As soon as I get back from the outside world, I can say, did I live up to my identity? Did I live up to, did I offer that to me? Did I offer that to others? And that defines me so well. And that's a great start because I can look at that and say, you know what? Nothing else matters because if I know that's who I am, I will act accordingly.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So your nucleus, first of all, it is amazing journey that you've been on here. And now to put this out into the world and say, I felt like your son was there with you developing that table,
No
and
question.
that you're using his legacy, which I like to talk about, is what was it about the person you lost that you want to, and capture and put in a bottle, and keep forever. And I feel like you're doing that in his memory, right? Like you're doing that,
Absolutely.
you're taking that, and then you're embodying that within you. And then you're
Yeah.
hoping that maybe when you do that, it's like that, stone that you throw in the water and then the ripple effect, that
Yeah.
everybody will feel that ripple effect, but it's almost like you're
Hmm.
borrowing his energy,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yeah.
you're filling first of all, you're filling your heart with love because you have so much love for him. And then you're using that as that fuel that drives you. And so your nucleus, I consider like our soul, right? And what
Hmm.
you're saying
Yep.
is that those outside distractions, so like I worked in public education, so I identified as a teacher for 32
Right.
years, and that's how people saw me. And
Yep.
now I'm not in that journey anymore. Well, somewhat. I'm still a professor, but um,
Right.
I'm Monica
Yes.
without
Yes.
the
Yes.
layers around
Yes.
me. And it's taking me, it'll be 2 years in June since I said goodbye to that life. And I still like, at this age, like, oh, wow, wait a second. I can just be me. And
Yes. Yes.
that's
And
what
what
you're
does that
saying.
mean? And what does that mean? Sometimes we don't even know what that means because we are so encapsulated by everything else that supposedly did define us.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
I
beautiful
think,
how you're
and
getting to that core. Sorry. Go
I
ahead.
no, it's perfect because I think one of the greatest things that I have learned, well, not learned, but been able to do is, well, two things. Is the first thing is that I can look at somebody, and it's not like I look and see, like so many things about them, but I can look at them in the eye, and I can say, okay, there they are, and I want them to be there, right? I want them to let all the ice melt off and that. And how I do that is I say, you're not going to overshadow my silly craziness. Come into my safe space.
Hmm.
Be you. If you want to watch for a little bit, that's fine. I'm not going to change, but I'm going to look over at you, and I'm going to say, to me, I'm going to say, okay, are they still, protecting themselves? What's going on? But if all of a sudden they'll jump in periodically and they say something or do something, I'm like, there they are, right there.
Mhm.
Okay, and maybe that's their capacity at that point, but it's beautiful because what I want them to do is to see what it's like, feel what it's like in a safe space that there's no judgment, there's no shame or guilt or fear or anything like that. They can be who they are
Yeah.
because the next time I see them, they may be in a group of people, right? You know, if it's a high school or whatever, and I see that kid for who they are, and I love to tease just a little bit with them and even just getting to know them and say, you know what, do you know how freaking awesome you are? I mean, seriously, I want to be like you when I grow up, right? And they're like, who is this guy? But if we look at suicide prevention, suicide awareness, anger management, I mean, all of these different things, there's something that is similar to all of those in the fact of don't talk about the cliff that they could jump off, right? The reason I say, and with my kids when they were growing up, I'd say make sure you put the fence up by the cliff so we don't have to deal with the ambulance at the bottom. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, you need to do what you're asked, or else there's going to be consequences, right? However, so everybody's like, oh, don't talk about the cliff. Don't trigger them because they'll go jump or whatever. Here's what I love to do. I love to walk up to that person who everybody's like, oh, they're going to be triggered or they're going to act out or whatever. I love walking up to them in that same group of people who are concerned and say directly to the person, do you know how freaking amazing you are? Do you know how every single time I see you, do you know that makes my whole entire day? I need to see you. And all of a sudden, it's almost like figuratively putting my arm around them and walking away as the mirage of that cliff goes away. And then the next time I see them, if they're in a group of kids who are their peers and that, I will address them in a different way that everybody else can notice. Because I'll walk up and I'll say, "Hey, isn't that the guy who I want to be when I grow up?" They get a big grin on their face. I walk up and everybody's like, "Who is this?" I'm like, "You guys know how freaking awesome this guy is right here. Do you have any clue?" And so I'm addressing them to the crowd, and all of a sudden it allows that person, without doing anything different, to be seen by somebody who is not a peer, but somebody who actually sees them. And what it does is it allows them to look at that person differently and say, what does that guy see that I haven't? What is it? Why do I always want to be around that person? What is it that makes it safe that, if things are going on and stuff, all of a sudden that person's there. That person is in the crowd and no one is concerned about it. Why? Right? So all of a
Yeah.
sudden to look at them and say, this is who you are, and just point it out. It's like if a guy gets a door for a girl, oh, I'm all over that. Dude, do you know how awesome you are? Don't you dare stop. And so the girl is already in there and she sees that he has this big grin on his face. He gets in the car and I see the girl smiling and she's like, what was that? And he looks up at me and he's like, that guy said, I'm freaking awesome because I got your door. What does that do? It doesn't take anything away from me, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
It reminds me when I was a teacher, I used to have these little tickets that said caught being good,
yes. People
right?
need to be caught being good more than they need to be reprimanded for saying, hey, no, that's not what we're doing, because maybe what they're doing is actually much better than what the whole group is doing.
Yeah.
I love that. How
Beautiful.
often did you get a chance to give out those tickets to kids?
So
And
I gave them out a lot, but I also it was interesting when I would say something nice to a student, how they would take it. They were so used to, by the time I was teaching mostly fifth and sixth, and then I taught some
Hmm.
seventh and eighth graders. By fifth and sixth, they're kind of programmed from school, like I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
Everything is
Yeah.
wrong. Everything I
Yeah.
don't do good enough. I'm not
Hmm.
good enough. And I would point out the good parts of their writing or whatever, their math,
Yeah.
like, and it was discombobulating to them. They become like, well, wait a minute, she's saying nice things about me, or it's nice
Exactly.
things to their
Yeah.
parents. And they
Yeah.
weren't used to it. They were used to
Hmm.
their kid getting in trouble, or they were
Hmm.
used to, and I was all about love and just loving
Yeah.
everything about them, because I always saw those students, like I like how you're saying, I see you, you're important,
Yeah.
right? Sending that energy. I always envisioned all of my students, just like if I had Bailand in my class,
Uh,
I would envision the day you came home from the hospital with him.
oh gosh.
He's somebody's baby, right? That
Yeah.
parent feeling. So as a parent myself, I know that feeling. I know that intense love. And that's the first thing that I said to my
Yeah.
sons when they become parents. I looked at them and said, now do you know how much I love you? And they went, "Oh."
Had no idea.
Right? They
Yeah.
didn't. And
Yeah.
so, like, that love of a parent, so thank you for sharing your story about Balin and
Yeah.
how this has fueled you to really think about the integrity of our lives. And that's another reason why I left my profession too, is because my integrity doesn't match with some of the
Yeah.
government controls that are coming on
Yeah.
education, and
Yeah.
all the testing that we're doing and all this stuff that's going on. It didn't match my soul. Like, it
Yeah.
didn't match who I was,
Yep.
and I couldn't do it anymore. And so just knowing your story is so inspiring to me, and I can't wait to print this out. I'm going to hang it up. And I hope that people, let's see, your website. Do you have a
We're
website?
we're working on a website right now.
Okay. But you're on Facebook as,
Uh-huh.
and
It,
A Day in the Life of Grief,
mhm.
a group, right?
Yep.
Or a
Yep.
page.
Yep.
So
So
all these links will be in the notes, and so make sure that you go find Dorian, hear his story, read his books. I know that they're going to help you. I do have two questions. So
um
this,
I'll make my answers quick.
okay. Um, So this one is the 10 most common misconceptions of grief, which I love to talk about. And I love to like tell people not to listen to what some people say just
Hmm.
because they don't know. They're trying
Yep.
to help,
Yep.
right? Like, but
Hmm.
what is the one misconception that you would just like to put out there? That,
I think what the biggest one, I mean, we hear time heals all wounds and you get over grief and all of that stuff. But I think the biggest one that we overlook so many times is that grief only happens when someone passes away, that you lose a person, that you lose even a pet, because there's so many things that go along with that we have to grieve, we have to work through, because it is something that feels like it's been taken away. Even a relationship, a friendship, going
yeah,
through, and we look at this and you say, I changed professions. I, went over here, and sometimes we don't know who the person is behind all this stuff that got up on stage and spoke and touched so many lives. And in our quiet moments, sometimes we have to grieve not knowing that person better than what we do right now, you know?
yeah. I love that. Thank you. And my final question for all guests are, what do you absolutely love about life?
I think it is being in the moment. And the reason I said it is because I've had to pull myself all the way back to be in a moment like this. Because if it gets too far out there, I'm not aware of everything that is going on around me, not in a controlling way, but being in control of my intuition. My intuition, I've learned, is spot on. So if all of a sudden we're having a conversation, I say, hold that thought real quick, and I turn around, something just happened. There's no way I could tell you why. Or if I'm on my way somewhere and their house is over on, I have to take a right and my gut says take a left. I don't know why, but I don't question it anymore. And it allows me to be so authentic and vulnerable. I think what I love the most about life is living in the moment, but also my authenticity and seeing someone else's authenticity. I don't tell people I love them. I look at them after we have a moment like this and I say, Monica, I love the hell out of you. Because what that means is our moment was perfect and nothing else matters right here, right now. And we can take that and go forward and love the hell out of other things, other people, other places, all of that.
Mm. Whew. I am honored to have you. This was amazing. Thank you for showing up. I know that, we had rescheduled a while ago, and
Yes.
then, things happen, but I also believe that for whatever reason, it wasn't meant to happen back then. Like, there's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
right or wrong. Like, people get really weirded out about canceling. I'm like, "Ah, the energy was
Yes, we
off.
do.
It's okay. The
Yeah.
energy's on today," right? Like, I
Yes.
can feel
Yes.
it.
Very
And
much.
so I'm honored that you shared your story, and the work that you're doing to help others is amazing. Keep it up. And yeah, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was an honor to be here.